Assalamualaikum and welcome back to my channel. My name is Layla and today's video is going to be a little bit of a different style than what I've done so far, which isn't much, but I figured I'd do a little voiceover for today's video just because I'm going to be walking you through how I annotate my books, and for that I feel like it's going to be better for you to see what I do rather than just me talk about it. So I'm going to walk through the 3 different versions that I use for annotating, and they go from easy or relatively easy to more complex, just based on the books, and I'll kind of walk you through the reason I choose to do one versus the other depending on what book I choose. So we'll walk through that together a little bit later in the video. So the 3 books that I'm going to use, my easiest one is going to be Medusa, The Girl Behind the Myth by Jessie Burton. Excuse me if I'm slightly distracted. I have my assistant here as well. She's trying to get some attention right now. And that's going to be my easiest annotation system. My second one is going to be Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and that's going to be my medium level of annotations. So what I would do in that kind of scenario for that book. My third one is going to be The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, also by V.E. Schwab, just because that one is the best example that I have for my more complex version of annotation system. So we can go through that a little bit as well. Without further ado, let's get started on talking about the annotation systems. Start talking to you about my annotation system, I kind of want to walk you through the different items that I use when I'm annotating my books, especially when I'm going for that longer version. So first up, I have a set of little sticky tabs, which are 8 colors. I just get those from Amazon. Then I use sticky notes. These ones are black. And then I have a set of clear ones. These are 2 different versions that I've gotten off of Amazon. You can use Post-its of any color. And then I also would recommend using a ballpoint pen. Of course, if you use the black sticky notes, you need something that's more of a Jelly Roll pen. For those, I recommend a Jelly Roll, specifically that brand, gel pen, because they tend to write pretty smooth. An honorable mention, which isn't in this video, is actually the set of pens that I use for my annotation system that are similar colors. I'll link those down below because I currently can't find them. First up is that shorter, very easy method of annotations, and for that I'm going to use Medusa by Jessie Burton. I do want to pause here and say that if you're sensitive to any type of spoilers, whether they be illustrations or words that you might be able to see, you probably don't want to watch most of this video and probably just want to listen to me talk about the methods. But for Medusa, I used the simplest technique that I have, and there's a couple reasons for that. It is a relatively shorter story than some of the other books that are on this list. It's also made of a material, the pages are material that's more plasticky and glossy in nature, and they really wouldn't hold up well to being written on. So for those kind of scenarios, I tend to pick up a sticky note that might have a similar color or a matching color to something that's on the cover. And for this one, I just chose these little yellow cat sticky notes that I had on hand that were close by. And what I do with those is I really highlight the quotations that I found or find really meaningful or impactful or very beautifully written. So you'll see a bunch of those throughout this book because it is very lyrical and it was absolutely beautifully written. Now we're on to Vicious, which is my more medium level of annotation system. You'll see it's so shiny, which is why I'm taking a moment to appreciate it. I do love Vicious. It is one of my favorite books that I've ever read, and I actually didn't annotate it the first time that I read it because I didn't know it was going to be a favorite. So when I went back on my reread, that's when I went through and did this annotation system. So you'll see throughout this particular flip through that I just write my notes in the margin in a black pen, and that's where that ballpoint comes in. And I'll underline or heart or smiley face or frowny face or whatever kind of reaction I'm having during the book, and I'll make notes throughout. sometimes they're notes about whether or not I loved a particular line, or I hated something that happened in the book, or I loved something that happened in the book. And it's kind of just a way for me to interact with the text as I'm reading it. For this type of annotation system, the only thing that I usually use is a sticky note at the front to say when I started the book and when I finished the book. Basically, that's just to keep track of how many times I'm rereading or how long it takes me to read. And then at the end of the book, I do write a little note to myself about how I felt when I finished it, if I'm still thinking about it, what kind of rating I might have given it, and you'll see that here. Lastly, we have my most complex annotation system, and for that I'm going to use The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, also by V.E. Schwab. This is literally one of my favorite books in 2021, so it obviously had a very intense and very loving annotation system attached to it. This is where you'll need all of the supplies that I listed out at the beginning of the video. You'll see as I flip through, there's some things tucked into the book, and that was just because I was moving my library around last month, so things got a little bit chaotic. But for this system, I use the 8 colored tabs, and I also use the markers that align with the tabs, so I can make sure that I am annotating and using the color system. And I'll put a little picture in here about the different colors and what I assign them to. I personally don't need a key at the beginning anymore, just because I've used my annotation system so much that I'm very familiar with it. I also use like the ballpoint pen to kind of write inside of the book. I used to do this in the colored markers or the colored pens, but I ended up not liking the way that it ended up showing up because sometimes the colors fade. So I use a ballpoint pen instead now, and then just underline with the color. Now, in addition to writing in the margins of my books when it comes to annotation, which is kind of similar to my medium level annotation system, I also break up my books into sections based off 100 pages. So after the first chapter, the first 100 pages, I put a sticky note. Second 100 pages, I put a sticky note. At 300 pages, I put a sticky note, and so on and so forth. And that's just so that I can kind of gauge my reaction and where I am throughout the entire book. So I want to be able to reflect on how I felt after the first chapter, whether I felt like I was intrigued by the story and I wanted to keep going. I want to know by 100 pages, am I still loving the story? 300, I want to know if I fell off at any point, or if I'm starting to pick up on certain things and seeing if I can guess what the ending might be, especially if it's something that has one of those kind of, the reader's supposed to be putting all of these pieces together. I find that really, really fun. It also helps break up that constant reading so that you feel like it's a lot less intimidating than if you were reading a 700-page book and you had to read all 700 pages. And just like with my medium level annotation system, I also write some notes at the end of the book, and that's just a rating, how I felt about it, whether I liked it or not. Of course, I had a lot to say about Addie, so there's a lot of notes there, including the multitude of post-its that I used. Something that I thought might be fun to include in this video as well was kind of setting up for my next annotation. And that's going to be using this book. It's lovely, it's gorgeous, and I can't wait to read it. It is not currently on my May TBR, but it might be put onto my June TBR because I'm really excited to get to it. The way that I recommend doing this is kind of not to pay attention to the words on the page, because it can get very, very easy to spoil yourself if you don't ignore the words. So I am going to go ahead and put that black sticky note. I am using the black ones this time. So I'm going to put the first black sticky note on that first page, and that's where I'll record when I start reading and when I finish. And I don't actually have to include any sticky notes for characters because this book has a lovely outline of all the characters that are going to be in it. So I'm going to put a black sticky note after the first chapter and then after every 100 pages. So you'll watch me do that really quickly. And that's kind of all I do to set up for an annotation system. And what I'll do is I'll keep my 8 color tabs close by. Sometimes I'll use those as a bookmark, but generally I'll just keep them close by with my pens that match them, and I'll go ahead and annotate as I'm reading the book. Can't forget that last sticky note on the very last page to record how I feel once I've finished.
I hope this gives you a little bit of an idea about some of the skills you might want to use when you're annotating your books, or if you have any idea about wanting to start annotations, where you might be able to start and start getting more comfortable with marking up your books. I look forward to seeing you all in my next video. There goes the camera because we have to have a cat involved at some point. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Bye.